Hello, welcome to growing reblooming bearded irises in Kentucky. Reblooming bearded iris have the ability to rebloom in late summer and fall as opposed to the varieties that we're used to that only bloom in the spring. The rebloom is not guaranteed because it is dependent on the season. However, in Kentucky, we generally get at least a few blooms sporadically each late summer and fall. Cooler, wetter late summers and fall generally gives us the best rebloom, especially if that follows what was a hot, drier summer because it gets the plant into more of a reblooming or a reproductive phase, which causes it to rebloom. Little history from irises. They are native to nearly every continent. The Greek iris means rainbow because they do come in a myriad of colors as opposed to a lot of other flowers. In Italy, dried rhizomes were used to produce fragrances, and in Germany and France, iris roots were hung in barrels of beer to keep it fresh. Bearded iris date back to the 1600s in Virginia because settlers brought them from Europe. Irises were grown in profusion in Syria, and in 1479, when King Thutmose III of Egypt conquered them, Thutmose was a gardener and immortalized them in sculptures and gardens in Egypt. The French King Clovis I had the fleur-de-lis, or iris, as a symbol of his reign in the early 500s. Yes, 500s, that's way back there. And the French monarchy, several hundred years later, under King Charles V, had the three fleur-de-lis on his coat of arms. Some anatomy of the iris plant. If you look there, you can see that the rhizome there at the base is actually, if you're not sure what a rhizome is, it's a modified stem for storage that plants use. And if you look below that, that's actually the roots. So the rhizome is not roots, it's actually the stem of the plant. And then you can see the leaves arise from that stem or that rhizome. And those leaves are called fans, as you can see in that picture. And then you can see the branch or the flower stalk which comes up. And then you'll see the flowers and all the flower parts there. It's easy to find that. And we'll talk more about that in a couple more pictures. Irises are broken down generally into two categories. They're called the bearded and the beardless. There is maybe an exception or two that we could talk about, but for most intents and purposes, they're broken down into two types. They're bearded and the beardless. And you can see in the picture there on the left, the raised orange area there, that's called the beard. That's just the raised area of, on the petal there. And then on the right there, you can see that this petal is actually smooth and doesn't have that little beard or raised section. Bearded irises come in different classes. They're originally native to Central and Southern Europe. The American Iris Society actually breaks them down into 6 groups. We have the miniature there. You can see they're very small. We have standard, dwarf, miniature, tall bearded, intermediate bearded, border bearded, and then the actual tall bearded iris. The botanical name for bearded iris is Iris germanica. Here is a miniature dwarf bearded, earliest to bloom. They bloom really early. They're the first ones to pop out and bloom for us in the spring. They get about 20 inches tall. These are good for rock gardens or in drifts to make a ground cover. They do spread quite readily in little by their rhizomes. It's a really nice little iris, especially if you want it at the front of the border or to do a ground cover, but this is going to give you some early season color. Then we have the standard dwarf bearded iris, or SDB. It's one of the most popular garden plants because it ranges in height from about 8 to 16 inches. Gives us kind of short, but still gives you a nice height. They do bloom early, just after the miniatures, and these are also best displayed in clump forming or a cushion of color. The colors are just about unlimited with this group of irises, so you can get a lot of different colors with these. Then we have the intermediate bearded, which is IB, which they get about 16 inches to 27.5 inches tall. The bloom season does overlap the other types somewhat. They do show dwarf characteristics in early bloom and color patterns, but also branches nicely, forming a nice bouquet, which also gives you more flowers because they have a longer bloom stalk. Some varieties are nicer in clumps and some are nicer as specimen plantings. It just depends on the variety that you actually pick for your garden. The border bearded iris, or BBs, this is a small version of the tall beardeds with a height range from about 16 to 27.5 inches tall. The bloom time is same as the TBs, as the tall bearded as well, and they have ruffled round petals, which you can see there in the picture. Then we have the miniature tall bearded, or MTBs. These are distinguished by their daintiness and their delicacy. You can see that flower there. There's a lot finer, more delicate look to it than some of the other varieties do. You get 16 to 27.5 inches tall, and the blooms are smaller than on the BBs, and the stems are small and wiry as well on these because it gives more of a dainty look to your garden. It looks like a cloud of butterflies. It's a great table irises as well because its stem is so thin it doesn't show up as much as the stems on the other bearded irises. And then finally, we have the tall bearded, which get 27.5 and above. These are branching stalks with many buds. You get a lot of flowers. These are come in a myriad of colors, ruffles, and patterns. The most extensive group of iris or bearded iris is in the tall bearded. You get extended bloom with these. You can get early, mid, late. Also, this is where the rebloomers come in into this group. And for most of us, this is probably what we have in our gardens. And that's tall bearded, obviously, for rebloomers is what you're going to take home. Those of you that actually register for the class. All right, bearded iris culture, when to plant. Bearded iris are easy to propagate and do well in most months, but July through October is your best months. You want to plant plants generally go semi-dormant in the heat and dry weather of summer, so again, late summer is best. And it's best to plant your iris 4 to 6 weeks before a hard freeze. Potting works great as well beforehand. Right now is a good time for us to plant these. We've got 4 to 6 weeks, hopefully, for a hard freeze. We usually don't get our real hard freezes up until mid to late November. All right, where to plant your bearded iris? The bearded iris, they do require at least a half a day of full sun or 6 to 8 hours. If you're in a really hot area, some afternoon shade is beneficial, especially if they're in full bloom and it gets really warm. The flowers will last longer if they get a little afternoon shade then. And irises grown in shade generally don't flower well, even though they will survive. But if you want flowers, you've got to give them that full sun that they require. And then the bearded iris do not like standing water. Obviously, that big rhizome there is fleshy, and that can rot quite easily. So make sure that you put them in the location where it drains well. As far as soil preparation, they thrive in moist, well-drained soil, not wet. I was talking about earlier. Compost and organic matter help loosen your heavy soils, which they're going to really appreciate that as they're growing rhizomes. If the soil's loose, it's a lot easier for them to grow through it. And the ideal pH is about 6.8, but they are very tolerant to pHs and just about anything else you can throw at them, so it's not a have-to like blueberries. And as always, it's good to get a soil test so you'll know exactly what's in your soil. Planting depth is probably the most important thing with growing these bearded irises. You want to plant your rhizomes barely below the soil surface. The tops of the rhizomes should be almost visible. If you bury them too deep, they won't bloom. You want to spread your roots out facing downward. Put those roots out, spread those roots out. If those roots are dried up, that's probably not going to be a problem. They will grow new roots. Don't worry about that because that rhizome does have plenty of food storage in there. And you do not plant your iris too deeply. Again, they may rot or they will not bloom well at all. So just keep that in mind. You're better to plant them too shallow than too deep. Here's just some pictures there. You can see I'm making a little mound there on the left and setting this rhizome on top of that, spreading those roots out, and then covering up just where that rhizome is just barely covered at the soil surface. This is a freshly dug rhizome. The ones that you usually buy or you're going to get from this class are quite a bit more dried up than that, which is not going to hurt the plant. It's going to come right back out. But those roots are not going to be fleshy or viable, so it's not going to be as big a deal to spread those out because it's going to have to grow new ones. As far as spacing, you want to space them 12 to 24 inches apart. Closer spacing gives you a quicker effect in clump formation, but it also is going to cause you to have to divide these quicker because they will fill in and get too thick a lot faster that way. Be sure to point your toes outward, and if you say by toes, it means that actual fan should be pointed towards the out, as you can see in this picture here, because they're going to grow in that direction as they grow new leaves and new rhizomes. A few problems is not necessarily a problem, but can be a problem is watering. Newly planted rhizomes need moisture for root development, but once they're established, ours are drought resistant, and like most plants, 1 hour per week is adequate. Just be sure you do not overwater these. If they stand in water, stay way too wet during the growing season especially, they will rot. Those fleshy rhizomes, once some rot gets in there, it can go through that rhizome quite rapidly. As far as fertilizer, the soil type and test will determine your needs on this. But you do want to apply an early spring application and another month after bloom of a balanced fertilizer, such as 10-10-10, around the rates of 5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Heavy nitrogen application, though, just encourages disease problems, so avoid that. You want to feed the plants, but don't overfeed because you're going to cause other issues that you might not have normally had. Keep that in mind, and do not put the fertilizer directly on the foliage or the rhizomes because that can burn and then cause rot. As far as dividing, generally you're going to have to divide these every 3 to 5 years, depending on where they're growing and how well they're growing. Sometimes it's necessary to encourage flowering and to rejuvenate the clump. The middle often dies out of these as they grow into a larger round clump. The middle may be completely hollow. At that point, it's definitely time to go ahead and separate those out and divide those out. The best time to divide these is July, August, September, or even October if you have to. Any of those months are fine and the plants will grow quite well. One thing, if you do it in, say, July or August, you've got time for those new rhizomes to get established, and you still might get some blooms out of those the following year, whereas if you do it later, you probably won't. If you want to divide your irises, first off, you need to dig the clump, the first picture at the top, and then you'll see the second picture there where they're actually just taking a knife and you're taking that fan where those fans meet and you're cutting that rhizome. So each fan has at least a piece of rhizome and a few roots to it. So that one got split into 3. There was 3 rhizomes and they went ahead and split those into 3 pieces. You could have just dug those a bigger clump and kept 3 pieces together. It would be totally up to you. Just make a clump faster that way. And then you can see the separated rhizome. It's ready for planting there at the bottom left there. So it's a single fan, but you can see 2 little fans starting to come out from the side of that. So that plant will take off pretty quickly and you'll have a nice clump of iris pretty soon. Some general care, you want to keep your iris beds free of weeds for optimum growth, just like you would any other plant you're growing. Cut off your bloom stalks after bloom to prevent seed pods because we're not trying to hybridize these and get seeds and plant those for later, and there's no reason for that plant to go and put all that energy into growing that seed pod whenever we want it to put that energy into growing rhizomes and making food for the next year's bloom. Bearded iris need dividing when the clump becomes bare in the middle and blooms lessens. We talked about that earlier. And then you want to cut off your dead foliage and remove after frost to deter rodent nesting. Dead foliage, some people cut the green foliage off as well. Don't do that. Just take out the dead stuff. Get all the leaves from the trees and stuff out of there. That'll just keep the rodents from nesting in there. And rodents could eat some of your rhizomes, especially if they're nesting near them. And because as far as, again, not cutting off those the green foliage, a lot of these bearded irises can stay green all winter. So if they're green all winter, if it's a warm sunny day, they're still making a little food for the plant. Few problems. We have bacterial blight here. This occurs in wet weather. It can cease in hot, dry weather. It's a faint water-soaked spots there on the leaves you can see in the pictures there. This is spread by water, and it can be spread by you working in wet plants, so don't do that because you can spread it. You want to disinfect your tools with 10% bleach solution just to make sure you don't have that on your tools, especially if you know you've had that in years prior. And then you want to remove old foliage in the fall and destroy it. Transplanting can also be helpful if you know you have a really bad situation where you've got a lot of that. It doesn't affect the rhizomes. It just kills back the leaves, which weakens the plants and reduces the amount of growth you'll get, which will reduce your blooms. Also, you could try fixed copper. It might do a little bit, help a little bit with this because fixed copper is an antibiotic, so to speak. It limits growth. Copper limits growth of bacteria, so it could help slow this disease down a little bit. Fungal leaf spot is very common in your irises, and you're probably going to see this no matter when you grow irises. It presents itself as small circular to oval spots on your leaves. They turn yellowish and brown with a red distinct border, and it even can kill all the way back the entire leaf, starting from the top down. It is more prevalent in rainy weather. Fungicides such as mancozeb and chlorothalonil are effective as they actually kill the fungal spores. You can also try some systemics like Bayer Advanced for fungicide for ornamentals as well. Bacterial soft rot, it affects rhizomes and can wipe out a planting if allowed to go untreated. It starts as a soft rot and it's stinky and mushy, and that's a telltale sign that it stinks. That smell is important. That tips you off to this being bacterial soft rot. Wilting and dying of fans follows. It's prevalent in warm, wet springs. This one, if allowed to take hold, can take out a whole clump pretty rapidly. So what you want to do, as soon as you see this rot occurring and you can smell it, take a spoon out and dip out, actually carve out the infected area of the rhizome with that spoon and get rid of it. And then you want to treat the infected area with a chlorine-based cleaner or antibacterial soap with triclosan in it. So this is one of those weird cures for this, but an antibacterial soap on that, where you've scooped that rotted out, where it meets the unrotted flesh, it can help stop that bacterial from spreading. Another problem you might find is fungal crown rot. It mostly affects your bearded irises, but it can affect some of your other irises as well. You can get a gray or tan cottony mass that forms on your leaf bases and your adjacent soil and rhizomes. If you see these little mustard seed-like structures, that's a telltale sign of this disease. And then actually you can get a secondary infection of soft rot after this rot sets in. Warm weather and moist soil cause more instances of this fungal crown rot. And you can maintain sanitation and good air circulation. It's going to give you your best bet to avoid this one. You can also use some fungicides like chlorothalonil or mancozeb I talked about earlier. Also, you can dip your rhizomes in 10% bleach solution at planting. That way, if you purchase some of these plants and it had this, you can kill that before you put it in your soil. Irish borer is probably the more common problem you're going to have. It is the larva of a nocturnal moth that lays eggs on your old leaves and debris in the fall, which is another reason that you want to make sure you get that old leaf debris out of that garden in the fall. The eggs will hatch and feed on your fresh iris leaves, moving down into the emerging new leaves, leaving notches in the foliage. And then the borer larvae are cannibals, leaving only one borer per plant. So they will kill each other and only leave one borer per plant, and that borer will get down into the rhizome. They'll gradually develop and move down to the rhizome, as I just said, hollowing out the center, causing death to the plant. And they can even move to other rhizomes next to it if there's not enough food in that actual rhizome that it's on. After the borer gets into the rhizome, they tend to be dug out. They grow up to 2 inches long and are a whitish or a pinkish color. And the borers enter the soil and pupate to become moths, which starts the cycle all over again. So if you have a plant that you know has a borer in it, take that rhizome out, or make sure you kill that borer, because you don't want this cycle to keep perpetuating itself, which is another reason to get rid of all of that old debris out of there, because that's where the eggs are going to be laid. Again, sanitation is your key to controlling these. Most pesticides aren't effective, but if you can get a good systemic like Bayer Advanced for ornamentals, which has imidacloprid in it, that would help kill these. And you would want to spray early spring when your plants are only 4 to 6 inches tall. Again, sanitation is a big help for getting rid of this problem. A few other problems you might get are aphids, which you can see that in the top left. That gets on most plants sooner or later. Those are easily controlled with good sprays of water or insecticide soaps, or even malathion or orthene, or one of those insecticides. You might also get the verbena bud moth, which I don't have a picture of it there, but they'll just eat the buds off, so you're going to have to spray if you get that one. Very uncommon around here. And then crickets and grasshoppers can periodically eat on your plants, usually not enough for you to warrant to even try to control them. And sour peel or roly-poly bugs can actually eat on these a little bit too, usually also not enough for us to really have any problem with controlling them. But if you do, 7 will work on those. And then we have moles and voles, which also can be a problem, but not always. They may burrow in, especially if you leave a lot of that debris out there, and the moles won't eat the plants. They're going to burrow under them and maybe dislodge the plants, and the voles could actually eat the rhizomes. So a few reblooming iris examples. I'm not going to run through all the names of these. You can read these, but I put these together because you can see a lot of different colors here, and you can get just about any color you want in these. And these are the reblooming, not the regular iris. They only bloom in the spring, so you can get any color you want in these, just like you can just the spring blooming iris. And you can get some that are quite short, which would be considered the miniature category. There's not as many of them as the tall bearded, but you can see blueberry tart there is a small iris. I've had that for several years. Really nice little plant, and so is bright blue eyes. But the rest of the tall ones are gorgeous. I actually personally prefer the tall bearded iris because you can get a long bloom time out of those, and you can get early, mid, and late season bloom. Also, here's a few more. I threw in that peach jam there. You can see there in the middle to show you that you can get some striping in the petals if you like that. And then Immortality at the top right is a white one there. You can see that one. That one is probably one of the most common ones and usually gives a really good rebloom around here, probably better than any other color. So for those that registered and paid your $20, you'll receive the following. And I did check these retail for over $50 for the lot of them. So you can see Sun Devil there is a relatively new variety, and it's got that yellow and almost black with a little maroon mixed in there. Uh, Contrasts quite well. It retails for $18. And then we have Rosalie Fig, which retails for $8. And Rosalie Fig is a really huge bloomer in the spring, and it might sporadically give you a few bloom stalks in the fall or late summer. Victoria Falls is a nice bright blue uh, iris there, and then we also have Pure as Gold, and you can see these retail at Shriners for $8.50 each. And last, we have a hem stitched, which you can see it kind of has the white bloom with a little purple veination on the edges of the petals. And this one retails for about $8. The great thing about these Reblooming iris is you don't really have to do anything for them other than what you would do for your regular bearded iris. The only upside is that these will actually most years give you at least a few bloom stalks in the late summer, even all the way up to a hard freeze. So it kind of gives you that spring feel even when you know that fall is right there upon us. A few places that you may want to check out if you want to buy some irises. You can see all through the PowerPoint that a lot of the pictures came from Shriners Gardens, which is actually one of the better iris producers in the country. But there's also several more there, they're all good places to buy nice iris plants. Not just bearded iris, but you can get some of your Japanese and Siberian and all the other irises there as well. Again, if anybody has any questions, they can call me at the Washington County Extension Office at 859-336-7741. Happy gardening.